has led to changes in the Earth's climate of a magnitude that are unprecedented over centuries and thousands of years. Climate impacts, some of them irreversible, are widespread, rapid and intensifying, from the poles to the tropics and from the mountains to the oceans. And without immediate and deep emission reductions across all sectors, we will not meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. The UNEP GAP report released a few days ago shows that we are headed towards global warming of 3 degrees Celsius if we carry on with our current policies. And let us not forget the gap in terms of adaptation and financing. But there are some promising signs of climate action. In some countries, there have been sustained emissions reductions, and these have helped to bend the rising trend in emissions globally. And in the past decade, there have been sustained decreases in the costs of renewable energy. Our assessments have identified multiple options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate change. And these can be implemented right now, but they need to be scaled up and mainstreamed through policies and increased financing. Now, the IPCC is gearing up for its 7th assessment cycle, and in less than 2 months, our 195 member governments will take decisions on the programme of work for the rest of this decade of climate action. Our aspiration is to make effective use of the best available science to deliver focused, policy-relevant reports, and to do so in an inclusive fashion that represents all perspectives. As the chair of the IPCC, I can reassure you that the scientific community is poised, using the resources available to it, to support the outcomes of COP28 in shaping climate action based on science. But finally, let us recall, science by itself is no substitute for action. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor Skia. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of the opening ceremony of COP28. Delegates, please remain in your seats. We will continue with the first plenary meeting of COP28, followed by the first plenary meeting of CMP18 and the first plenary meeting of CMA5. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2B of the Supplementary Provisional Agenda, adoption of the Rules of Procedure. The draft rules are contained in document FCCC/CP/1996/2. Parties may recall that the draft Rules of Procedure are being applied with the exception of Rule 42 due to lack of consensus. At COP27, the Presidency held consultations and reported that there continue to be no consensus on the matter and propose that consultations continue at COP28. I therefore propose that we continue to apply the draft rules of procedure with the exception of Rule 42. I propose that Mr. Ahmed Al-Ghardaqa, a senior member of my delegation, holds informal consultations on this issue. I will report on the outcome of those consultations at the closing plenary meeting. Hearing no objection, it is so decided. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2C of the Supplementary Provisional Agenda, adoption of the agenda. I would like to express my deep appreciation to all parties for their flexibility, support, and commitment to reaching agreement on the adoption of the agendas and launch of work swiftly and smoothly, and to deliver a successful and ambitious outcome of this conference. Together with the COP27 presidency and the chairs of the subsidiary bodies, we held a series of consultations and bilateral meetings with negotiating groups and parties on the adoption of the agendas of the governing and subsidiary bodies. On Monday, 27 and Wednesday, 29th of November, we also convened heads of delegation meetings on the adoption of the agendas. Throughout these consultations, parties expressed a range of views and a common desire to initiate proceedings swiftly. And smoothly, given the scale and importance of mandates and deliverables expected here. The items proposed by parties to be included in the agendas reflect genuine concerns of parties and were proposed in a constructive spirit. They are all important issues, and my team and I took great care to ensure that all views were heard. Further to the consultations and heads of delegation meetings, please allow me to outline the understandings reached regarding the adoption of the agendas of the COP28, CMP 18, CMA 5, SBSTA 59, and SBI 59. I propose that the governing and the subsidiary bodies adopt their agendas presented in their respective supplementary agendas without the inclusion of any of the items proposed by parties, as well as Agenda Item 10H of the CMA Supplementary Provisional Agenda entitled Sharm el-Sheikh Dialogue in the scope of Article 2, Paragraph 1C of the Paris Agreement and its complementarity with Article 9 of the Paris Agreement. This proposal is on the understanding that parties will still be able to consider the underlying issues and concerns related to those agenda items, either under other agenda items in line with their existing mandates or under consultations to be held by the Presidency. I further propose that the underlying issues and concerns in relation to the following proposed items can be discussed in the context of ongoing discussions under the mandated agenda items, including regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agenda of the COP entitled Mountains and Climate Change, highlighting the need for the protection of vulnerable mountain ecosystems while building the resilience of mountain peoples and economies to reduce loss and damage. These issues can be considered in discussions under the 16th meeting of the Nairobi Work Programme Focal Point Forum on Understanding and Closing Adaptation Knowledge Gaps in Mountains, High Latitude Areas, and the Chrysosphere, as well as future activities of the Nairobi Work Programme. Regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agendas of the CMA and subsidiary bodies entitled Urgently Scaling Up Financial Support from Developed Country Parties in line with Article 4, Paragraph 5 of the Paris Agreement to enable implementation of developing countries. These issues can be considered in the discussions under CMA Agenda Item 10A, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance. Regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agenda of the CMA entitled Doubling Adaptation Finance as part of the efforts towards the implementation of decisions of 1/CP.26, paragraph 11, and 1/CMA.3, paragraph 18 on adaptation finance. These issues can be considered in discussions under CMA Agenda Item 10A, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance. Regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agendas of the COP, CMA, and the subsidiary bodies entitled Operationalization of the Principles of Equity and Common but Differentiated Responsibilities and Respective Capabilities in accordance with Article 2, Paragraph 2 of the Paris Agreement. These issues can be considered in the discussions under CMA Agenda Item 4, SBSTA Agenda Item 5, and SBI Agenda Item 8 on the global stocktake. Regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agendas of the COP, CMA, and the subsidiary bodies entitled Mission 1.5, Positive Incentives for Accelerating Early Actions and Policies that are nationally determined. These issues can be considered in the discussions under CMA on Agenda Item 4, SBSTA Agenda Item 5, and SBI Agenda Item 8 on the global stocktake. Regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agendas of the COP, CMP, CMA, and the subsidiary bodies entitled Concerns with Unilateral Trade Measures Related to Climate Change and Their Potential Adverse Impact on Equitable and Just Transitions in the Context of Sustainable Development and Efforts to Eradicate Poverty. These issues can be considered in the discussions under CMA Agenda Item 4, SBSTA Agenda Item 5, and SBI Agenda Item 8 on the global stocktake. And regarding the sub-item 10H of the supplementary provisional agenda of the CMA entitled Sharm el-Sheikh Dialogue on the Scope of Article 2, Paragraph 1C of the Paris Agreement and its complementarity with Article 9 of the Paris Agreement, the report on the dialogue be considered in the discussions under CMA Agenda Item 10A, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance. I also propose the following way forward regarding the matters listed below. Regarding the item on the supplementary provisional agenda for the CMA entitled The Special Needs and Special Circumstances of Africa, I propose to convene consultations on this matter following the practice taken at previous conferences. The outcome of these consultations and any other issues raised during the consultations will be reported back under the agenda item Other Matters. On the sub-item on the supplementary provisional agenda of the CMA entitled 7th Review of the Financial Mechanism, I propose to hold consultations on a way forward on this matter. The outcome of these consultations and any other issues raised during the consultations will be reported back to the CMA later in the session. On the item on the supplementary provisional agenda of the CMP entitled Issues Related to Article 3, Paragraph 9 and Article 21 of the Kyoto Protocol, I propose to hold consultations on a way forward on this matter. The outcome of these consultations and any other issues raised during the consultations will be reported back to the CMP later in the session. The above understandings are not intended to exclude consideration of any of the underlying issues and concerns raised by parties in any other discussions under the agendas, but merely to ensure that our work can proceed in an expeditious manner and avoiding duplication. The above understandings will be recalled when we adopt the agendas of the CMP and CMA. The above understandings will be reflected in the reports of the sessions of the governing bodies. The understandings will apply mutatis mutandis to the related issues on the supplementary provisional agendas of the subsidiary bodies and will be recalled by the chairs of the subsidiary bodies prior to the adoption of the respective agendas and reflected in the reports of the sessions. Further, I propose that the following agenda item be held in abeyance. COP item 14. Consideration of proposals from parties and amendments to convention under Article 15. Sub-item A. Proposal from the Russian Federation to amend Article 4, paragraph 2F of the convention. And sub-item B. Proposal from Papua New Guinea and Mexico to amend Article 7 and 18 of the convention. COP item 15. Second review of the adequacy of Article 4, paragraph 2A-B of the Convention. Dear delegates, with these understandings and the proposal just outlined, and with immense gratitude for the flexibility shown by all parties to allow our important work to begin forthwith, I invite parties to turn to documents FCC/CP/2023/1 and Addenda 1 and 2. I propose to adopt the supplementary provisional agenda contained in document FCC/CP/2023/ADD.2, amended to reflect these understandings with the following items deleted: item 18, item 19, item 20, and item 21. I hear no objections. I see Kyrgyzstan have asked for the floor. Please.
Honorable Chairperson, distinguished delegates, esteemed hosts from the United Arab Emirates, I extend heartfelt greetings on behalf of the Kyrgyz Republic to everyone gathered here for the 28th Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We commend the United Arab Emirates for their exceptional preparation and leadership, setting a stage that inspires progress and unity. As we convene at this crucial juncture, the gaze of the world is fixed upon us, full with anxiety and expectations. The challenges we face are not only unparalleled, but also threaten the very fate of our survival as a species. The responsibility to act and to act decisively has never been more pressing. The Kyrgyz Republic is committed to contributing constructively to this conference and working constructively with the Presidency and all fellow national delegations. Our focus aligns with the broader global agenda, yet we bring to the table a perspective shaped by our unique geographical and environmental circumstances. In this spirit, we propose the inauguration of a new dialogue on mountain and climate to focus on the pivotal role of mountainous regions in the global climate system. This initiative is not just vital for over 1 billion people residing in these landscapes across more than 100 nations, but is essential for the planet as a whole. The health of our mountain communities is inextricably linked to the health of our global climate. As we advance through the sessions of this conference, the Kyrgyz delegation will actively seek support for this mountain climate dialogue. Our goal is not only to bring attention to this critical issue, but to foster actionable strategies and collaboration. In this regard, our country has been a consistent advocate of the agenda for integrating mountain issues into international negotiations at all levels for more than 20 years. We are grateful to all partners for their support of the initiative of the Kyrgyz Republic to adopt the resolution Sustainable Mountain Development at the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly, within the framework of which 2023-2027 was declared the 5 years of action for the development of mountain regions. In implementation of this initiative, we look forward to the support of not only mountainous countries, but also of all other countries in the implementation of the adopted Global Action Plan under this resolution of the UN General Assembly, since mountains are water towers that provide water to around 2 billion people. Kyrgyzstan, understanding the importance of collective action, unites countries in the group of Friends of Mountain Countries and has also joined the group of Friends of Cryosphere and the Forum of Climate Vulnerable Countries, a platform that brings together countries that are most vulnerable to climate change and produce the least emissions. We call on the international community to support the efforts of mountain countries aimed at solving the climate and environmental problems of mountain ecosystems. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kyrgyzstan, for your kind words and your initiative. I see that Bhutan has requested the floor. Bhutan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, Bhutan would like to thank the COP presidency for the warm hospitality and impressive arrangements and hard work in bringing us all together to this beautiful city of Dubai. Mr. President, Bhutan strongly supports the intervention made by Kyrgyzstan on an urgent call for dialogue on mountain and climate change to be launched here at COP28. Bhutan reiterates our submissions and requests made during numerous similar consultations in previous COPs on the issue of mountain ecosystem and its inclusion in the process. There is more than adequate scientific evidence proving that fragile mountain ecosystems are extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change. We are already witnessing irreversible damage due to the changing climate in the Himalayan mountain ecosystems and live in constant fear. In fact, during pre-COP last month, in Bhutan, there was a displacement of an iceberg causing a glacial lake outburst, knocking the side of the lake wall and releasing about 2 million cubic meters of water to rush down the valley. The IPCC report confirms that the rate of ice sheet loss increased by a factor of 4 in the last 3 decades. The unprecedented pace of glacier retreat at the global scale is more alarming in the Himalayas. Even if global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius, 1/3 of the glaciers in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region will disappear by the year 2100. And as you all know, this is the best case scenario where the world manages to limit warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. The high impact climate events are stressing vulnerable sectors such as agriculture, energy, biodiversity, forests, food security, infrastructure, public health, and development. The livelihoods of our people are at stake. The impacts of melting glaciers are not only limited to the mountainous regions, but to downstream regions. Rapid ice sheet melt could lead to catastrophic sea level rise even before the end of the century. The IPCC report confirmed that combined ice sheet and glacier mass loss contributed to 42% of this global mean sea level rise from 2006 to 2018. This will result in the extinction of small islands and mountain habitats. Mr. President, colleagues, I wish to emphasize that we contribute to the least to climate change, but ironically hit the hardest with its impacts. The world has witnessed our leadership on the environmental fronts. For instance, Bhutan has communicated an ambitious revised NDC and reaffirmed to remain carbon neutral despite the development challenges we face. And therefore, our ask for this is only reasonable. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Bhutan. I see that Guatemala has requested the floor. Guatemala, you have the floor.
Guatemala has the honor to deliver this on behalf of Chile, Costa Rica, Honduras, Panama, Paraguay. And our statement is in line with the messages that will be delivered by Cuba on behalf of the G77 and China group. We're grateful to the government of the United Arab Emirates for welcoming us to this beautiful city of Dubai and for the work of the presidency of this COP that has gone into making this possible. Distinguished delegations, as we can see in the 6th IPCC report, some of the consequences of the extreme global warming impacts are irreversible. With respect to adaptation, the general expectation is that this will be a substantive contribution to supporting adaptation based on the best available science and avoiding future needs for high costs, especially when in some cases we are exceeding our adaptation capacity. We have a framework with ambitious targets and indicators for the GGA through a structured approach based on the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program, and which is contributing to the GST. With respect to the Santiago network, ILAC supports the draft text prepared in the 58th session of the subsidiary bodies as the basis for negotiations. We reiterate the importance for the Secretariat of the network being independent, and it must have broad national representation at its headwork and in its offices so that it can deliver balanced technical assistance and ensure that the host covers all the loss and damage spectrum for everyone. With respect to the L&D fund, although the results of the TC5 is far from being perfect, we have to consider that the final package agreed upon is the basis for safeguarding access to resources and its operationalization, and to do so effectively. We will be working towards adopting the recommendations of the TC5. ILAC also highlights the importance of GST as a fundamental outcome of this COP. The Special Climate Action Group underscores because this is maybe the last report before we cross the 1.5 threshold, with special emphasis on the small window to increase ambition as well as to assess the challenges and opportunities under the Paris Agreement, so as to provide clear conclusions and substantive action for non-state actors. ILAC wants to see a comprehensive inclusion of the synthesis reports, and we must not reopen their conclusions and focus instead on future steps to achieve results. It is key that the GST is the base for future action, and it must be in line with the cycle of ambition and include a guide of actions and processes that will help correct course based on science. We highlight the importance of considering the intergenerational impact of decisions on climate change, and we urge stronger financial commitments. With respect to the CQG, we must recognize the significant progress made in dialogue this year, where we have been focusing on tangible options, and this has proved to be helpful to delineate various options within each critical dimension of the target. We are looking forward to a decision with procedural and substantive progress. We want to highlight the importance of continuing to share experience on Article 1.2c, and we must highlight its complementarity with Article 9, which is one of the long-term objectives of the Paris Agreement, and therefore it can help facilitate and broaden efforts to make reality Article 2.1a and 2.1e. Its implementation should reflect the interconnection of financial flows with the general ambition under the agreement with respect to keeping temperature rise between 1.5 centigrade and development and transfer of technology are fundamental, and we need endogenous capacities in developing countries to have a successful rollout of this. We need efforts to overcome the lack of financing and implementing the technological results. We must remember that cooperative approaches under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement still require critical decisions to finalize the complete architecture for rapid implementation of these mechanisms while ensuring transparency and environmental and comprehensive environmental approach.
Thank you, Guatemala. I appreciate and very much value your contributions. Allow me, though, just to say that, colleagues, we will have the opportunity to make our national statements later during this session. And I see no more requests, and I hear no objections. Let us now proceed to adopting the agenda, and in fact, let's get to work immediately. It is so decided. Distinguished delegates, regarding the agenda items for which informal consultations by the Presidency are required, I wish to inform that I will appoint senior delegates to lead these consultations on my behalf, and I will keep parties informed on the progress of the consultations. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, allow me once again to express our appreciation to everyone who contributed to the smooth and rapid adoption of the agenda. Our success in launching our work without delay sends an important message of commitment, dedication, and determination to commence our important and urgent work on all items on our agenda. All parties contributed to forging this consensus around the agenda through their flexible and constructive engagement. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2D of the agenda, election of officers other than the President. Mohammed Nasr from Egypt has begun consultations on the election of officers to bodies under the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. I thank Ambassador Nasr for the work undertaken so far, and I propose that he continues the consultations to finalize the nominations. In accordance with established practice, confirmed nominees to the Bureau will be invited to attend meetings of the Bureau as observers until the elections have taken place. Parties will note that women currently comprise the 38% of the membership of Convention, Kyoto Protocol, and Paris Agreement bodies. I urge parties to nominate men and women with a view to achieving the goal of gender balance. In light of the high number of outstanding nominations for a large number of officers under the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement, including for many constituted bodies entrusted with important technical work, I urge parties to intensify efforts to transmit the remaining nominations by the deadline of 8 p.m. GST on Saturday, December 9th. I propose to return to this item at the closing plenary of the COP. I hear no objections, and it is so decided. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2E of the agenda, admission of organizations as observers. The conference has before it document FCCP/CP/2023/3, which includes a list of IGOs and NGOs that have expressed a wish to participate in the UNFCCC process as observers, and a list of already admitted organizations that legally changed their names due to mergers with other organizations eligible for admission. These lists were the basis on which organizations were informed of their provisional admittance status to COP28, on the understanding that the final authority to grant admission lies with the COP. In accordance with the recommendations of the Bureau on this matter, I invite the COP to admit as observers the organizations listed in document FCCP/CP/2023/3. Distinguished delegates and colleagues, I acknowledge that there is no request. I once again invite the COP to admit as observers the organizations listed in document FCCC/CP/2023/3, and hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item. I see Russia requesting the floor. Russia, the floor is yours.
President, the Russian Federation would like to make a statement on item 2E of the agenda. We note the granting of observer status under the convention to two supposedly independent organizations, which are in fact governed and funded by the government of the United States. This is the National Democratic Institution and the George Soros Fund Open Society. It is well known that their record includes interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states, organizing internal disruption and protests. We believe that inclusion of these supposedly independent NGOs as observers is intended to politicize the climate process and will do harm to negotiations under the convention. Furthermore, once again, we note the overrepresentation of organizations only from one group of states. We trust that in the future, the process of selecting observers will be given greater attention. We request that the statement be included in the meeting record. I thank you.
Thank you, Russia, for your statement. We will note your statement in the record. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2F of the agenda, organization of work, including for the sessions of the subsidiary bodies. Today, the governing and subsidiary bodies will convene their opening plenaries and launch work under all agenda items. Upon completion of the opening plenaries of the SBSTA and SBI, the five bodies will reconvene in a joint plenary to hear statements from groups and observer organizations. I see that the US have requested the floor. The US, you have the floor.
Mr. President, thank you. First of all, congratulations, and thank you for your very powerful opening comments. Let me just say very quickly, I don't want to take a lot of time on this, but the United States would like to underscore the importance of ensuring access by civil society to COP28. And we're very convinced that the meaningful participation of climate activists, human rights defenders, and other members of civil society is an indispensable element for success of this conference. So in this respect, we're very concerned about the assertion that NGOs that clearly meet the UNFCCC criteria for admission as observers should somehow not be accredited, not be permitted to be here for obviously other reasons. As the Secretariat has found, both the NGOs referenced in the previous intervention meet the criteria for the admission as observers. And there is no question that these NGOs are qualified in the matters of UN climate change regime. There is no basis for any party to question the basis for either of these two organizations' participation in our process. And if the complaining party's intervention is going to be reflected in the report of this session, the United States would request that this response also be reflected in the report. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, United States, for your statement. We will note your statement and the record. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2F of the agenda, organization of work, including for the sessions of the subsidiary bodies. Today, the governing and subsidiary bodies will convene their opening plenaries and launch work under all agenda items. Upon completion of the opening plenaries of the SPSTA and SPI, the 5 bodies will reconvene in a joint plenary to hear statements from groups and observer organizations. Dear colleagues, let me outline how I would like to organize work under the COP. On the following items, which are also on the agendas of the relevant subsidiary bodies, the COP will take appropriate action on the basis of recommendations from the subsidiary bodies. Please note that the full titles of the agenda items I will now list are projected on the screen. Agenda items 4, 5, and 6. 7, as it relates to report of the WIM Executive Committee. Sub-item 8B, as it relates to the second review of the functions of the Standing Committee on Finance. Agenda items 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, including the report on gender composition and the synthesis report on progress in integrating a gender perspective into constituted body processes, and sub-item 16A. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Colleagues, on Wednesday, December 6th, the SPSTA and the SPI will conclude their work. I look forward to receiving the outcome of the work of the SPSTA under the leadership of Harry and of the SPI under the leadership of Nabil. After the closure of the SPSTA and the SPI, I will convene a plenary meeting to propose the modalities of work for the second week of the conference. Dear colleagues, tomorrow, Friday 1, December 1st, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President of the United Arab Emirates, will have the distinct honor of welcoming heads of states and government from more than 170 countries to the World Climate Action Summit. The first part of the high-level segment will also take place tomorrow, Friday, December 1st, and will continue on to Saturday, December 2nd, during which heads of state and government will deliver their national statements or statements on behalf of UNFCCC negotiating groups. The high-level segment will resume on Saturday 9th and Sunday 10th of December. During the second week of the conference, we will reconvene the COP to consider decisions and conclusions for adoption. Hearing no objections, we will proceed on this basis. Let's turn to an issue regarding the youth. A priority for the United Arab Emirates for every element of this COP has been inclusion, especially inclusion of those who are most vulnerable and most impacted by the impacts of climate change, such as women, indigenous peoples, children, and youth. The UAE COP28 Youth Climate Champion, Her Excellency Shamma Al-Mazrou'i, has worked to build opportunities for youth to engage with the UNFCCC processes. Strong inclusion of youth who are set to inherit the long-term impacts of climate change is a must, and we hope parties will discuss how this can be developed at this COP. I propose to hold consultations on a way forward on this important issue. I will appoint a senior member of my delegation to lead consultations on this issue. I invite the COP to turn to sub-item 2G, dates and venues of future sessions. In accordance with the principle of rotation among regional groups, the president of COP29 would come from the Eastern European states, and for COP30 from the Latin American and Caribbean states. The Latin American and Caribbean states have nominated Brazil to host COP30. I encourage the Eastern European states to accelerate and finalize their consultations on this matter to ensure timely decision. I propose that Hannah Al-Hashimi, a senior member of my delegation, conduct consultations on my behalf with a view to proposing a draft decision on this matter for adoption by the COP. Hearing no objection, it is so decided. I invite the COP to turn to agenda item 7, Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage Associated with Climate Change Impacts. The COP is invited to consider the matter of its authority over and guidance to the WIM, including its executive committee. I propose a senior member of my delegation to undertake consultations on this matter. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the COP to turn to agenda item 8, matters relating to finance, including sub-items A to G. For sub-item 8A, the COP is invited to continue discussions on long-term finance. It is also invited to consider the summary of the deliberations at the 5th High-Level Ministerial Dialogue on Climate Finance on the progress and fulfillment of the goal of mobilizing jointly the $100 billion per year by 2020, convened at COP27, and to take any action it deems appropriate. I propose to establish a contact group co-chaired by Carlos Fuller from Belize and Gard Lindes from Norway for consideration of matters under this subcommittee, under this sub-item. I would like now to invite the representatives of Germany and Canada to report on the progress and fulfillment of the goal mobilizing jointly the $100 billion per year by 2020. Germany, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, COP President, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. As we all know, climate finance is a key part of our collective strategy to address climate change, and now more than ever, delivering support is essential to responding growing needs of developing countries. These efforts include meeting the $100 billion mark urgently and continuing to improve the quality and the effectiveness of climate finance. I am here to briefly report back on the work that my colleague, Minister Stephen Guilbeault of Canada, and I have conducted over the past months and years on the progress made to deliver on the $100 billion climate finance goal. On November 16th, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development published a report showing that in 2021, climate finance contributors collectively provided and mobilized $89.6 billion in climate finance. This is an important increase from 2020 and exceeds projections made by the OECD in the context of the Climate Finance Delivery Plan led by Canada and Germany. We were pleased to see the OECD Secretary General indicating that based on preliminary data for 2022, There is a likelihood that the goal was already met in 2022 and certainly was met in 2023. This is further underpinned by the good increase of the report Climate Finance by MDBs in 2022. I hand it over now to my Canadian colleague. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Germany. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Special Envoy Morgan. This is the third year that Germany and Canada have been working together with contributors on the U.S. $100 billion goal and listening to recipients and civil society about the impact of the financing provided. Meeting the $100 billion mark is an important step forward, but it is clear that we cannot stop here. We understand that the U.S. $100 billion is not enough to meet the needs of developing countries. Meeting the $100 billion mark I would like in particular to highlight the positive trend noted in the OECD report regarding the increase in funding for LDCs and SIDS. However, supporting and amplifying ambitious climate action in the developing world will require much more in the future. The new goal is an opportunity to support developing countries in meeting needs outlined in Article 2.1 of the Paris Agreement. We look forward to working with all of you on the NCQG negotiations so that we can establish a transformational financial goal at COP29. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Canada. Thank you both for these positive indications on progress on this very important issue. Regarding sub-item 8B, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance, the COP is invited to consider the report of the SCF and consider the recommendations of the SPI on the second review of the functions of the SCF and take any action it deems appropriate. I thank the co-chairs of the SCF, Gertrud Wolonski from Austria and Zahir Fakr from South Africa, for their leadership and work this year. I propose to establish a contact group co-chaired by Apollonia Maiola from Italy and Ali Waqas from Pakistan for consideration of matters under this sub-item. Regarding sub-item 8C, report of the Green Climate Fund to the Conference of the Parties and guidance to the Green Climate Fund, the COP is invited to provide guidance to the GCF on policies, program priorities, and eligibility criteria, taking into consideration the reports of the GCF and the SCF. I thank Noman Bashir Bahati from Pakistan and Victoria Gunderson from the United States of America for their leadership as co-chairs of the GCF board and the members of the board for their hard work. I propose to establish a contact group co-chaired by Marine Lanoy from France and Richard Mayongi from Tanzania for consideration of matters under this sub-item. For sub-item 8D, report of the Global Environment Facility to the Conference of the Parties and guidance to the Global Environment Facility, the COP is invited to provide guidance to the GEF on policies, program priorities, and eligibility criteria, taking into consideration reports of the GEF and the SCF. I thank the chairperson of the GEF, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, and the GEF Secretariat for their work undertaken by the GEF. I propose to establish a contact group co-chaired by Ms. Lanoy and Mr. Mayongi for consideration of matters under this sub-item. For sub-item 8E, seventh review of the financial mechanism, the COP is invited to agree on the guidelines for the seventh review of the financial mechanism, taking into account the guidelines contained in the annex to decision 12/CP.22. I propose to establish a contact group co-chaired by Ricardo Marshall from Barbados and Solomon Schoenfield from the United Kingdom for consideration of matters under this sub-item. For sub-item 8F, compilation and synthesis of and summary report on the in-session workshop on biennial communications of information related to Article 9, Paragraph 5 of the Paris Agreement, the COP is invited to consider the compilation and synthesis of the second biennial communications of developed country parties and summary report of the second biennial in-session workshop and information to be provided by parties. I propose to establish a contact group co-chaired by Elena Pereira from Honduras and Kelly Sharp from Canada for consideration of the matter under this subcommittee. Under sub-item 8G, operationalization of the funding arrangements responding to loss and damage referred to in paragraph 2, including the fund referred in paragraph 3 of decisions 2/CP.27 and 2/CMA.4. I propose to take this agenda sub-item later during the session once we have launched all other work under the COP, CMP, and CMA. May I take it that the COP agrees to the organization of work proposed under agenda item 8, matters relating to finance, as just proposed. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I would like to thank the co-chairs for accepting this role. To accelerate our work, I request the co-chairs of the contact groups established under sub-items 8A to F to produce draft decision texts after the first meeting of the respective contact groups. I invite parties to refer to the daily program and CCTV for information on the time and location of the first meeting of the contact groups. I invite the COP to turn to agenda item 16, sub-item B, decision-making in the UNFCCC process. At COP27, parties were unable to conclude their consideration of this matter, and in accordance with rules 10C and 16 of the draft rules of procedure being applied, this matter has been included in the provisional agenda for COP28. I propose that Omar Lebreki, a senior member of my delegation, undertake informal consultations on sub-item 16B, and I will report on the consultations at the closing plenary. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I invite the COP to turn to agenda item 3, report of the subsidiary bodies, sub-item A, report of the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice. I invite the co-facilitators of the 2023 Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue convened at SBSTA 58 to present the findings of the informal summary report. Nayal Odia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, it's my honor to be here as co-facilitator for the 2023 Ocean and Climate Dialogue alongside Mr. Julio Cordano of Chile. Those of us in this room today are all well aware of the urgent need for actions to mitigate and adapt to climate change, in many cases through our own personal experiences with the effects of climate change. The Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue, which took place over 2 days in conjunction with Substa 58, and focused on the topics of coastal ecosystem-based restoration, including blue carbon and aquatic foods, highlighted the need for us all to pay more attention to the critical role which a healthy ocean can play and must play in our collective efforts to address the climate crisis. We know that the ocean offers unique opportunities for holistic climate change adaptation and mitigation-based solutions, helping us to better cope with extreme weather events and sea level rise driven by climate change, as well as serving as a key global carbon sink. However, we also know that climate change is already adversely affecting the ocean, threatening its ability to regulate the Earth's climate. We are at a tipping point. A key message that came out of this year's dialogue was the importance of strengthening ocean-focused research and data management, bridging knowledge gaps, and promoting standardized data sharing to effectively integrate the ocean into climate commitments, including the NDCs. With increased knowledge, we will be better equipped to identify where protection and restoration efforts will contribute to strengthening the ocean's ability to capture and store carbon. Not only does the ocean offer enormous potential for holistic climate change mitigation and adaptation measures, but it is also a vital source of nutrition for the world. The outcomes of the dialogue highlight the importance of sustainable aquatic foods to the global carbon cycle, as well as the significant positive potential of the ocean to achieve just transition to renewable sources of energy and low-carbon food security. This year's dialogue has called for the integration of aquatic food climate solutions within national processes, including into the UNFCCC process, by adopting a systems-based approach and linking national climate policies with blue food production. The lessons learned from the dialogue emphasize that our globally shared ocean presents vital opportunities for taking ambitious climate action, and that we must act now. I would now like to give the floor to my co-facilitator, Mr. Cordano, to say a few words on moving this work forward.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, parties to the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement have recognized the importance of conservation, enhancement, and protection of the ocean to address the climate crisis. This year's dialogue was aimed at strengthening ocean-based climate action at national level and under the UNFCCC process. Over 250 positive solutions were shared by parties and observers at the dialogue, which showed the wealth of existing options and the importance of the ocean in the global fight against climate change. Through the dialogue, we learn about real-world examples of collaboration with indigenous peoples, local communities, vulnerable groups, youth, women, and the private sector that can address policy barriers, facilitate investments, and promote effective conservation efforts. The dialogue report calls on parties to continue integrating ocean-based climate solutions into national climate policies and strategies, including into NDCs and NAPs. The report also further stresses the importance of increasing, scaling up, and ensuring stable and accessible finance flows for the implementation of sustainable fishing practices and management and restoration of coastal ecosystems, and to strengthen the resources of the Secretariat to follow up on the parties' policies and practices in this regard. A key message that emerged from the Ocean Dialogue was strengthening institutional linkages between partners at national and international levels and across the UN mandates and processes, including the recent BBNJ Treaty and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to enhance global ambition and action for a climate-resilient ocean. The Paris Agreement emphasizes that the global stocktake should inform parties in enhancing their climate actions and international cooperation. In this line, a key message from the dialogue is that the GST outcomes considers guidelines for parties to be able to strengthen ocean-based measures in their updated NDCs and national strategies. It is our view that the ocean holds one of the keys to an equitable and sustainable planet, and this should be reflected in the outcomes of this important meeting. We remain available to parties, Niall and I, as co-facilitators of this dialogue, to parties and observers to continue engaging on the outcomes of the Ocean Dialogue. And for this, we will convene an informal and open meeting that is scheduled on the 3rd of December at 1 p.m. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Julio and Niall. We will return to agenda item 3 once the work of the subsidiary bodies has concluded. Delegates, this brings us to the end of the first meeting of the COP. We will meet later today for the joint plenary of the governing and subsidiary bodies to hear statements from groups of parties and observers after the opening plenaries of the subsidiary bodies. We will resume this meeting of the COP after the CMA opening plenary to consider COP agenda sub-item 8G, operationalization of the funding arrangements for responding to loss and damage referred to in paragraph 2, including the fund referred to in paragraph 3 of decisions 2/CP.27 and 2/CMA.4. This meeting of the COP is suspended. I now declare open the 18th session of the Conference of Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol. We will now proceed with our work under agenda item 2, organizational matters. I invite the conference to consider sub-item 2A of the provisional agenda, adoption of the agenda. I invite parties to turn to documents FCC/CMP/2023/1 and Addenda 1 and 2. With the understandings that I outlined earlier in the first plenary meeting of the COP, I propose to adopt the supplementary provisional agenda contained in document FCC/CMP/2023/1/ADD.2 as orally amended to reflect these understandings with the following items deleted, item 14 and item 15. I hear no objections. It is so decided. I invite parties to agenda sub-item 2B, election of additional officers. As I mentioned during the COP opening plenary, Mohammed Nasser of Egypt has been continuing consultations on the election of officers to bodies under the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement on my behalf. I propose to return to this item at the closing plenary of the CMP. I once again urge parties to intensify efforts to transmit the remaining nominations by the deadline of 8 p.m. GST on Saturday, December 9th. I hear no objections. It is so decided. I invite parties to turn to sub-item 2C, organization of work, including for the sessions of the subsidiary bodies. On the following items, which are also on the agendas of the relevant subsidiary bodies, the CMP will take appropriate action on the basis of inter alia recommendations from these subsidiary bodies. Please note the full titles of the agenda items I will list are projected on the screen. Sub-item 4A and items 8, 9, and 12. During the second week of the conference, we will reconvene the CMP to consider the decisions and conclusions for adoption. I hear no objections. It is so decided. Colleagues, as I already mentioned during the COP opening on Wednesday, December 6th, the SBSTA and the SBI will conclude their work. I look forward to receiving the outcome of the work of the SBSTA and of the SBI. I invite the CMP to turn agenda item 4, reporting from and review of parties included in Annex 1, sub-item B, annual compilation and accounting report for the second commitment period for Annex B parties under the Kyoto Protocol. The CMP is invited to take note of information contained in reports for 2019 to 2023. I would like to mention that the report for 2023 is the last one of the annual compilation and accounting reports. The CMP may wish to note that this concludes the consideration of this agenda item. And I hear no objections. It is so decided. I invite the CMP to turn to agenda item 5, matters relating to the Clean Development Mechanism. Under this item, the CMP is invited to consider, inter alia, the annual report of the CDM Executive Board and the technical paper prepared by Secretariat in response to the CMP 17 mandate. Subsequent to the publication of the annual report, the Executive Board met in Dubai earlier this week and requested further guidance on specific matters to the CMP. The meeting report is available on the CDM web pages of the UNFCCC website. I would like to thank CDM Executive Board Chair Lambert Schneider and Vice Chair Spencer Thomas for their leadership, and the members and alternate members of the board for their hard work. I propose to establish a contact group to consider this item to be co-chaired by Kazuhisa Kwakotsu from Japan and Alec Movandika from Zambia. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMP to turn to agenda item 6, matters relating to joint implementation. CMP 17 decided to terminate the Joint Implementation Supervisory Committee. It requested the Secretariat to take necessary steps to conclude matters relating to the operation of the committee for consideration at CMP 18. The CMP is invited to consider and provide guidance on this matter, and for this purpose, I will propose a senior delegate to work on a draft decision with the support of the Secretariat. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMP to turn to Agenda Item 7, matters relating to the Adaptation Fund. Under this item, the CMP is invited to consider the annual report of the Adaptation Fund Board. I would like to thank the Chair of the Adaptation Fund Board, Antonio Navarra from Italy, and the members and alternate members of the board for their hard work. I propose to establish a contact group to consider this item, to be co-chaired by Diane Blacklane from Antigua